me. I'm Debbie, by the way. Sorry for anybody that doesn't know me. So today we have our presenter, Brian. He's our regulatory systems analyst. He's going to talk to you today about ClinicalTrials.gov. Today, after the presentation, we will send out all the sign-in sheets. So for those of you that may want SOCRA or to send them to other organizations, you will have those as well. We will also provide you the slides. And if you notice, if you've already went through the slides a little bit, there's a whole bunch of links. Those links will be turned on. So if you want to click on them, you will be able to go to those links in the slides. All right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk to you about ClinicalTrials.gov. Yeah.
So like Debbie said, we're going to go over ClinicalTrials.gov and what is needed. The objectives for today are going to do it's really going to be, I think we turned it off. So.
Okay.
The objectives for today is it's going to be more of a high-level overview of the system. Going to be going over what the guidelines are, what's required for registration and results reporting, why it's beneficial, and just a high-level process for obtaining accounts and reporting results and penalties that are associated for non-compliance. So just to mention here, this is just a PowerPoint presentation and a high-level overview, so make sure to do some of your own research as well, because this, just by being high-level, can't cover everything. So, again, we're going to go over what ClinicalTrials.gov is. We're going to explain the different reasons you need to register through FDA, CMS, journal requirements through ICMJE and associated journals, and then voluntary reasons. Identify who is responsible for registration, and we'll do some examples, and we'll have some resources. And like Debbie said, the presentation will be emailed later, so you'll have access to all of those links. So what is it and why should you be concerned with it? So this is the page that you first see when you go to ClinicalTrials.gov, the public-facing side. And ClinicalTrials.gov is a national registry of federally and privately supported research studies conducted by the U.S. and around the world. The NIH, through the National Library of Medicine, has developed the site in collaboration with the FDA as a result of the FDA Modernization Act, which was passed into law in 1997. Basic rationale is that it can be a tool to improve transparency and reduce duplication of effort. While each study is updated in real time, there's an archive feature that allows the public to see the history of changes to the record. So these are some of the links that give you more information on registering a trial, getting results. So the first one for submit studies, we'll go over why you should register and submit results in more detail. We'll go over registration purpose and the groups that benefit, the results database purpose and who benefits from seeing that, and also show a breakdown of selected trial registration laws and policies. The second link for researchers will show resources for registering a study or submitting results, and provides resources for how to find studies on ClinicalTrials.gov. And the last one for study record managers, that'll give you more information on how to obtain an account. So ClinicalTrials.gov can be searched in real time to find enrolling and completed studies, including different conditions, interventions, outcome measures, sponsors and collaborators, locations, phases, and dates, as well as results. So what is the rationale? So increase research transparency and help people find trials. So one of the reasons that this originally came about was there were some companies that were acting in bad faith and researchers that were acting in bad faith and only reporting favorable results. As an example, there was one company that only reported the first 6 months of results of data because it made their product look good. But when that extended out further to 12 months, it was not nearly as favorable and just looked comparable to everything else that was on the market. So the idea was to have more transparency and to require that all results get uploaded to prevent gaming of data from happening, amongst other things. It also helps the public know how its money is being spent, such as studies that get federal grants, NIH grants, quicker and wider public access than some publications can provide. The suppression of research results impedes the scientific process in all areas of science, and trials results inform the public's medical decisions. It also provides a place where researchers can see what's going on elsewhere, even before results exist, to help prevent duplication of effort. So if you've got an idea for a study, it's a good practice to search that database first to see if it's already been done previously. So there are just three more key problems for why this came up. Not all trials are published in journals, so this gives much more transparency. Publications do not always include all pre-specified outcome measures, and unacknowledged changes are made to the trial protocol that would affect the interpretation of the findings. So this is a history of how this all came about. So with the Modernization Act that we mentioned in 1997 set the law for the database to be created. In 2000, the database was launched, and then after that, in 2005, ICMJE got on board and thought it would be a good idea to start having all of the studies registered for transparency as well. 2007, FDAA came into effect and required more types of trials to be registered. In 2013, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid rule came into effect to register trials that get grant money from them. There was 1 year grace period, so that ultimately went into effect in 2014. So the National Cancer Institute also requires registration. Then the final rule in 2016 clarified and expanded the regulatory requirements and procedures for submitting registration and summary results information. And then the NIH policy in 2016 said that every clinical trial funded in whole or in part by the NIH is expected to be registered on ClinicalTrials.gov and have summary results info submitted and posted in a timely manner. So this summarizes all of those laws. So at the top, those are all the groups that really push for and encourage ClinicalTrials.gov and the registration of trials. And then on the bottom are the potential users of that database, be it for recruitment, for journal editors to check what's out there, researchers and funders, IRBs, and policymakers. So why should you register a trial on ClinicalTrials.gov? For a commitment to research participants, scientific validity and transparency, ethical standards, responsible stewardship of federal funds, to help IRB assess value of new studies. It's required by the law, FDA. It's required by journals. It's required by the NCI, CMS, the World Health Organization, and also by many foundations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as a requirement for funding. So the first reason, it's the law. Most prospective clinical trials involving regulated drugs, biological products, and devices must now be registered on ClinicalTrials.gov. The law now also requires reporting of results for all applicable clinical trials that are required to register. So this one was passed in 2007, and if the primary completion date was on or after January 18, 2017, results information submission is required. The final rule extends the requirement for results information submission to applicable clinical trials of drug products, including biologicals, and device products that are not approved, licensed, or cleared by the FDA. The rule requires the submission of data in a tabular format summarizing participant flow, demographic and baseline characteristics, primary and secondary outcomes, as well as results of any scientifically appropriate statistical tests and adverse event information. In addition, the rule requires the submission of the full protocol and statistical analysis plan. Some key components of the FDA final rule that applies to applicable clinical trials. Registration must be done within 21 days of the first enrollment. The record must be verified at least annually. The record must be updated within 30 days. If something is updated in your record, such as completion date or recruitment status. Any comments from the QA staff at ClinicalTrials.gov need to be responded to within 15 days if it's a comment related to a registration, or 25 calendar days if it's a comment related to results. Results are due in the system 1 year after the primary completion date. It's important to note there, though, that because of the time required to get results entered into the system and the review process, results should be entered at least 2 months prior to that. And they require submission of full protocol and stat plan. And do not submit a protocol at the time of registration, as the protocol may change. Do that at the end. Some phase 1 trials, though they are not ACTs, are required to register under FDAMA, the Modernization Act. These involve many primary experimental treatments for serious or life-threatening diseases, whether using an IND, a Group C cancer drug, or other FDA-regulated products. Thus, many studies for cancer and other serious and life-threatening diseases must be registered regardless of phase. Some examples that FDAMA would apply to, in addition to cancer, would be AIDS research or Lou Gehrig's disease. FDAMA also required the public posting of summary information about publicly and privately funded clinical trials that study the efficacy of investigational new drugs for serious or life-threatening diseases. So registration. Per FDAMA, registration is required for all ACTs, interventional studies, phase 2 to 4, not phase 1 drug or small feasibility devices. If a study has U.S. FDA jurisdiction and studies initiated after September 27, 2007, or on or before that date, or ongoing as of December 26, 2007. And like I mentioned earlier, registration has to be done within 21 days of the first enrollment and updated at least once a year. So FDAMA results submission is required for ACTs, approved, licensed, or cleared by the FDA, and that applies to all ACTs with a primary completion date after December 2007. That updates, though, ACTs of drug products and devices, products that are not approved, licensed, or cleared by the FDA applies to applicable clinical trials with a primary completion date on or after January 18, 2017. The final rule addresses the statutory requirement for the submission of summary results information for applicable clinical trials of drug products, including biologicals, and device products that are approved, licensed, or cleared by the FDA. It also extends the requirement for results information submission in trials with products that are not. So, result submission within, again, within 12 months. If the product is not approved by the primary completion date, but is approved later, then results due 30 days after the approval. Delays are possible, primarily for manufacturer or under limited special circumstances. Pending publication is not considered a good cause for delay. Some of the acceptable delays, but they may not automatically be granted are, and usually delays are not granted. If you are the manufacturer seeking initial approval, if you are the manufacturer seeking approval for new use, or if you request an extension for good cause. And pending publication and delays in data analysis for unspecified causes would not be considered good cause. So registration is also required by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Effective January 1st, 2014, mandatory reporting of the MCT number on claims for items and services provided in qualified clinical trials for Medicare coverage. So for CMS, what is a qualifying trial? The purpose of the trial must be the evaluation of an item service that falls within Medicare benefit category, such as physician services, durable medical equipment, and diagnostic tests. Trial must have therapeutic intent, and the trial must enroll patients with diagnosed disease, not only healthy volunteers. So the third reason is if you want to publish. The ICMJE requires registration in a publicly available searchable system. So that can be any publicly available searchable system, but it's much easier to have that done in ClinicalTrials.gov since many other agencies require registration there as well. The scope of what is a clinical trial is much broader than FDA. They basically want all clinical trials to be registered, and over 1,000 journals adhere to the ICMJE policy. So it's just a good idea if you want to publish to have that trial registered. So there may be some journals that follow the ICMJE recommendations, but have never requested a listing on the ICMJE webpage. There may be some listed journals that do not follow all of the many recommendations and policies in the document. Authors and others with questions about the processes or policies of a specific journal should consult that journal directly. So there's a new ICMJE data sharing statement requirement for publications. For trials that start enrolling participants on or after January 1st, 2019, ICMJE will require data sharing statements in the ClinicalTrials.gov registration as a condition of publication. In ClinicalTrials.gov, that data sharing statement is entered into the IPD sharing statement module. So which studies need to be registered for journal publication? Required for prospective studies that assign subjects to an intervention or concurrent comparison or control groups, and study the cause-effect relationship between medical intervention and a health outcome. The scope is much broader than FDA. Interventions include procedures, behavioral treatments, and dietary interventions. And health outcomes include any biomedical or health-related measure obtained in participants, including pharmacokinetic measures and adverse events. ICMJE policy says results reporting will not be seen as prior publication. All phase 1 studies are included because they involve safety and pharmacokinetic measures. Also, where FDA has exclusions for small feasibility studies of devices, ICMJE does not. So when to register? So this is where there's a big difference from FDA. So like we talked about earlier, FDA requires registration within 21 days after the first subject enrollment. ICMJE requires registration prior to the first enrollment. So they do not require result submission, but they do encourage it. They will not consider results, again, they will not consider results data posted in the tabular format required by ClinicalTrials.gov to be prior publication. So the fourth reason is for NIH funding. Effective January 18, 2017, clinical trials that are funded by the NIH must be registered and submit summary results as a condition of funding. So to reiterate, the NIH requires registration and results reporting for all NIH-supported clinical trials, regardless of whether or not they are subject to FDA. So for the NIH, which studies need to be registered? If the answer to the following 4 questions is yes, the study is considered a clinical trial and must be registered. Does the study involve human participants? Are the participants prospectively assigned to an intervention? Is the study designed to evaluate the effects of the intervention on the participants? And is the effect being evaluated a health-related biomedical or behavioral outcome? These criteria are what is needed to meet the criteria of a clinical trial by the NIH. So this is a recap of all of the reasons we went over for registering a trial. It's needed for FDA, per the FDA Modernization Act. The NIH requires it. Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services requires it. It's required for a many cases journal publication, and having the trials registered is also good for increasing recruitment. Those trials will be out there and searchable. So who is responsible for registering? Generally, this is the principal investigator. Anyone who has a user account for the PRS data entry system at ClinicalTrials.gov can enter the information into the ClinicalTrials.gov system. However, entering the data requires someone who is thoroughly knowledgeable about the specific details of the study design, eligibility criteria, intervention, and outcome measures. Entering study results may require someone with a deep understanding of the data and the statistical analysis that were performed. Regardless of who enters the information, only the responsible party can initiate the approve and release actions required for the record. And generally, the responsible party is the PI. So who is responsible for registering the trial? For FDA in the final rule, the responsible party is defined as the IND IDE holder. And if no IND IDE, the industry or academic institution that initiated the study. Per ICMJE and CMS, anyone can register, but the ICMJE, the author is responsible for ensuring complete registration. So technically, the grantee of a federal grant is the responsible party. So the university may be the responsible party, but the law allows delegation of the responsible party role to an individual PI. Designation of a responsible party. So the responsible party can be designated by the sponsor to a PI who is responsible for conducting the trial, has access to and control over the data from the trial, has the right to publish the results of the trial, and has the ability to meet all of the requirements for submitting and updating clinical trial information as specified. Example of designation, if it's a PI-initiated study at WVU funded by the NHLBI, the WVU is the sponsor as the grant funding recipient. The WVU can be the responsible party or designate the PI as a responsible party. Even if not designated as a responsible party, the PI can still enter data into ClinicalTrials.gov. Okay, so for some of these, so for the first one, let's see if anybody can answer these. So if the study, if it's department funded and PI initiated research, who would be the responsible party for that? In that case, it would be the PI. If it's NIH-funded research, but WVU is the grantee institution, then it can either be the university, or the university can designate the appropriate PI. If it's a pharmaceutical company funded research, multi-center study, including a site at the university, the responsible party would be the pharmaceutical company. And if it's a device company funded research where the PI is the IDE holder, the PI is the responsible party as the IDE holder. So what happens if you do not register your study? So for FDA, public notices of non-compliance and violations can be sent out. NIH funds can be withheld. The FDA can issue sanctions, including civil monetary penalties up to $10,000 a day. So just to expand on that one, from the regulation, if a violation is not corrected within the 30-day period following notification, the person shall be subject to a civil monetary penalty of not more than $10,000 for each day the violation after such period until the violation is corrected. And just to add a note on that, the $10,000 figure is actually tied to inflation, so it's likely to increase every year.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
So is it the institution that would be held liable or the individual?
Who's the responsible party?
Well,
In this case,
the institution, and they delegate to the PI.
I think we would need to get clarification on that, but for the university, I would think it would be going towards there, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure.
WVU claims to own the data
Mm-hmm.
of all of that research.
Right.
So I think they just need to, that would have to be ironed out clearly.
Yeah. I would lean towards the university only since we're ultimately the responsible party, but then just delegating that to the PI in many cases.
And is this for not registering or like not publishing the results?
It can be for either. It can be for not registering a full clinical trial or not publishing results. Anything else on that one? Yeah. For CMS, if you're getting funding through them, billing could be delayed or denied. And for ICMJE and many other journals that follow them, they just won't let you publish. And then for the NIH, the award may be terminated and future funding could be withheld. So this slide is from see at the source at the bottom, ClinicalTrials.gov. They're not directly affiliated with the FDA, but they are tracking the possible fines that are out there. So this slide is from a few weeks ago, so it has gone up, but the U.S. government so far could have, under the law, imposed a over $5 billion in fines, but so far they haven't collected on any of that, but they could at any time, just stressing the importance of getting trials registered and reporting results in a timely manner. Okay, so what are my responsibilities for the following studies? So Sarah's going to answer all of these. All right, so for this first example, this study is going over the effectiveness of the drug for treating nicotine dependence in young people. The study design is multi-center, randomized efficacy study with interventions, and the primary outcome is smoking behavior over 6 months. So should it be registered? Should it report results? And who would be the responsible party for that? Sarah.
I am not the responsible. Mama said yes, yes, we are not it. Yeah. I assume it's a multi-center, could be though, still could be WVU. Could be. We need more detail.
Isn't that always the case?
So if it was sponsored by an industry-funded party, then they are responsible. Correct. If they're the sponsor, they could just be funding and not be responsible for sponsorship. Not like that. Thank you. This is why she's better at everything.
All right, so the answer for this one is yes, the study should be registered because it's ACT and also meets the journal standards. It's an applicable clinical trial because it's a clinical investigation, a controlled study using an FDA-regulated drug, and has one or more sites in the U.S. Responsible party is either the pharmaceutical company if they began it, or the overall PI who controls the protocol, unless the study is funded by the government, in which case it's the grantee institution until delegated. Okay.
Brian, one of the problems with that would be your ideas are all great, but because this is play around with this site, they would say, all right, so you haven't, we don't accept your explanation of which your primary, where I've gotten seen done every time is your primary outcome variable. If they decide that they don't like it, they'll keep on rejecting it over and over again, because in your study you had some words in it which are not clearly defined, dependent, and they would ding you on define dependence, so that your outcome variable actually has to be the definition of dependence and not. So we put up there, for 6 months, all I can tell you is unless they've changed it, they'll reject it and won't let you hit that final acceptance thing, and you keep on getting the error code for that. And that's my biggest problem with this site is if they don't like your word, you never get it accepted.
You bring up a valid point. While this slide just kind of it's a fun exercise. Right. You're right. And I was at the NIH a few weeks ago for training with their team, and they do want everything very spelled out, very clarified, with really not a lot of wiggle room for interpretation.
I found that they kind of what they want in their comments.
They do.
They kind of spell it out for you what they want, so you kind of have to and then submit it, and see if they take it, and then come back again.
Exactly, it takes a couple times.
And they want it also, and they want it in writing.
Yes.
So Dr. Rosen, they do have a QA review guide on the site, and that's the exact guide that the QA team at PRS uses when they're reviewing your study. So that's something that they told us as well. If you have that guide by you when you're entering into the system and just try and follow their review system, that it's much higher likelihood of going through.
And we can make sure that's a link in the presentation as well.
Yes.
Do that. Okay.
Yes. I might have mentioned it further down.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It was just a good time to bring that up.
Okay.
Okay, so just a second exercise. So the effects of chronic sleep restriction in young and old people. The study design is open label, the crossover assignments, interventions of chronic sleep and restriction, primary outcome or changes in sleep and waking EEG measures, frequent measures of performance, attention, alertness. And the other fact is that there are two universities collaborating, Dr. A at AU and Dr. B at BU. Dr. B designed the study, but A will enroll more. So should it be registered? Should the results be submitted? And who would be the responsible party for that?
Not required for probably yes.
Yep. So here there's no need to register or report results. For the DAWs, it's not an ACT because it involves only process of care, not testing an FDA-regulated or approved product. However, ICMJE standards do apply as there is assignment into groups regarding process of care and health outcome. So registration is recommended to protect publication options. No results are required by ICMJE, but they are encouraged. Who's the responsible party? This particular one, there's just not enough information to tell. So this instance would require follow-up to see who would get that designation.
Random question, sorry. Why does that matter, the other fact? Why does what matter? The other fact, as to who's the responsible party. Only one can only register by one.
Yeah.
Right, I'm just asking. I didn't know if it was I'm sorry, I'm just asking.
So the purpose of this slide is to get to ask that question.
Oh, okay. Oh, great.
So and that's the correct answer. Who is it? Not sure without getting a little bit more information in this case. So you inadvertently got the question right.
There's new things for me. There we go.
Let's get that one. Okay. The dental graduate student is the investigator for a medical device study. Study design is randomized. The intervention is treatment with one of 3 different FDA-approved medical devices. The primary outcome, which device increases fluoride in saliva the most. All right. So this is an ACT. It's a prospective clinical study of health outcomes, and it compares an intervention with a device against a control in human subjects. The study device is subject several sections of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Therefore, register and report results because it's required under FDA. Register the study prior to the first enrollment to meet journal standards. The responsible party may depend on if the student is conducting the trial or has access and control of the data. Once the student graduates, responsible party depends on who has access and control of the data. Follow-up is critical. Someone at the institution has to accept responsibility to the responsible party to enter results. So the important thing there is that the responsible party in this case is a graduate student. Does that sound like a good idea in most cases, or?
So, IRB-wise, the graduate student, as this is being done as a part of the student project, would not be allowed to be the principal investigator here at USC. So,
And
somebody else would be the PI.
And that's the general consensus, is that you could, but it's better to have their mentor or faculty be the responsible party. That way, what happens when the student graduates, you don't want to leave the student hanging. Okay. So what is the FDA requirement for informed consent language? The FDA mandated changes in consent form language. The FDA has added a new element of consent that is required for applicable clinical trials. All ACTs are required to include this new element of consent as of March 2012. By regulation, the required language must be incorporated verbatim and cannot be altered in any way. Sarah, would you like to read that one?
We'll make sure that we won't, actually. You can't alter that in any way. Is that what I was supposed to say?
No, you're supposed to say a description of this clinical trial will be available on ClinicalTrials.gov as required by U.S. law. This website will not include information that can identify you. At most, the website will include a summary of the results. You can search this website at any time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's directly from the ORIC template that's available online.
And then I just had a note here that when the study does not need to be registered as required by law, then it should not be included. So what if you have more questions? So you are free to reach out to us at CTSI through the Center of Excellence, and we can help field questions on ClinicalTrials.gov registration, reporting, or any other issues that you might be having. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but all of these additional resources are available as well for you to read through and get more familiar with the system and what the requirements are. So I just had a few additional things that I wanted to mention. The PRS guide, again, the QA review guide that they have posted is a great resource while getting studies registered or reporting results to try and cut down on the number of times that gets sent back and forth. Right now, they do have a results reporting guided tutorial that they launched, I believe it was in August, and that goes step by step through the results reporting process with a lot of different types of study design examples. And they're also going to be releasing in the next couple of months a registration guided tutorial to walk you through the registration process as well. Just stressing again for results, that not to wait close to that 12-month period to start entering after the primary completion date, but to start results reporting process several months prior. Just to follow on that, the PRS staff at the NIH consists of about 18 QA people at the moment who are going through about 400 to 500 trials per week for that team. So just to put in perspective the importance of getting that data in as early as possible, because they've got a lot on their plate as well. So these are just this is just an acknowledgement that a lot of this presentation was adapted from the original presentation that was put together by partners and organizations at the Mayo Clinic, University of Michigan, University of Rochester, then was updated further by University of Michigan, Mayo Clinic, and Duke in 2015, and we added on to this and updated its current law just recently. So that's what I have.